So this week we're right in the middle of a 3-week stretch where we're talking about stewardship as a parish. Last week we heard some powerful witness from parishioners about how God has worked in their lives. And next week we'll be invited to reflect and then respond in a concrete way as we fill out the annual commitment cards. But our readings this weekend do something important for us. They don't focus on what we're supposed to do. They start with who God calls. Every time I hear the Beatitudes, I'm reminded about how strange they sound. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who mourn. These aren't the kinds of people that the world usually considers blessed or successful. These aren't the loudest or the most powerful or the people who have the greatest influence in our world. Jesus is talking about someone different, and that's not an accident. St. Paul says something similar in our second reading today. He tells the Corinthians to take a look at themselves. He says, "Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many of you were powerful or of noble birth." And then he says something really important. But God chose you anyway. God chose the foolish, the weak, the lowly. And that's not an accident. God doesn't choose the way the world chooses. And that should be a great comfort to all of us. So here's the connection here that I don't want you to miss. In our second reading, St. Paul tells us who God chooses. And in the gospel, Jesus tells us what their lives look like. God chooses the lowly, the foolish, the weak. And then Jesus says, and this is how they live. They're meek. They're merciful. They seek peace. So as we commit ourselves and we talk about stewardship, our time, our talent, our treasure, what we're really talking about is this: letting God work through humble, ordinary people who are willing to live the Beatitudes. Again, stewardship is just God working through ordinary people who live the Beatitudes. And I don't say this as a theory. I've seen it play out in my own life in ways I never expected. Often when I was at first reluctant to get involved here in the parish, I've noticed that many of the most important turns in my faith life happened simply because I said yes when I really didn't want to. I'll tell you a story. When my son Grant was in first grade, he came home excited one day about Cub Scouts. Now, I agreed to take him to the first meeting, but I was very clear with myself. I am not getting involved. Then they asked for volunteers to be den leaders. Suddenly, every dad there became very interested in his phone. No one made eye contact. And I was getting annoyed at their unwillingness to step up. And that's when I saw it. My hand was in the air. I remember thinking, what are you doing up there? I thought we talked about this. But after several years as a den leader, I realized that Scouts gave me some very special moments with my son. It introduced me to other kids and their families. And then it introduced me to a parishioner named Bob Pryatel, who one day invited me to this thing called men's Bible study on a Saturday mornings. That led me to men's renewal, which you're going to hear more about later at Mass. And eventually all of that led Deacon Paul to invite me to consider becoming a deacon. You see, none of this was planned. It all started with a reluctant yes. But all along the way, God placed people in my life who shaped me in ways I never expected. At another time when I was helping with parish gardens, these are the people who weed and water and do the landscaping, on the parish grounds, I met a woman named Judy Myris. Now, Judy was decades older than me, but without ever trying to teach me anything, she showed me how to serve without taking credit, how to make people feel seen and heard, and how to take children and their faith seriously. And then in that men's Bible study I mentioned, I met Howard Duda and Dave Selby. Howard taught me some important lessons. He taught me to speak about my faith without embarrassment. And Howard ended every conversation he had with someone by saying, "God bless." And now I end almost all my emails and texts with "God bless." And then Dave would correct me anytime I said, "I'm lucky." Dave would say, "No, you're blessed." Judy, Howard, and Dave, none of them powerful, none of them famous, all of them gone now, sadly. But they're exactly the kind of people St. Paul is talking about. Not wise by human standards, not powerful, but chosen by God. And my life is better because I knew them. And I knew them because of their willingness to give their time, their talent, really to give themselves to building up the kingdom of God here at St. Francis. That's stewardship. It's nothing more than trusting that God can do something with what we're willing to give. And this is where the Beatitudes stop becoming just ideas and start becoming very real. Let me give you a few examples. Blessed are the poor in spirit. If you want to see what it means to be poor in spirit, look to adoration, or to a Bible study, or to a faith-sharing group, places where people come because they know they need God. If you want to see meekness, look to the cleaning angels or the Arts and Environment Committee, the people who serve quietly behind the scenes and get virtually no recognition for it. If you want to see what it means to mourn with others, look at those who visit the hospital or hospice or the jail or bring communion to the homebound as they do at the end of every Mass. And if you want to see peacemakers, look at the adults who invest in our young people, confirmation prep, helping with CYO, or showing kids in PSR what a faithful adult looks like. And here's the common thread in all of that. None of these people would ever point to themselves. They'd point to what God has been doing, quietly, unnoticed, through what they were willing to offer. You see, when St. Paul says, "Whoever boasts should boast in the Lord," I think this is what he means. None of us gets to brag about what we've done. We just get to be grateful for what God has done, often through very ordinary people. And the truth is, God is still doing that. God still chooses ordinary people, and he still works through what they are willing to give. And someday, when you look back on your life, it won't be the powerful people who mattered most. It will be the people who quietly lived the Beatitudes. And my hope is that each of us will be counted among them. God bless.